Hey everyone, I'm Angie Miller, the host of Strong Mind, Strong Body. And in my upcoming episode, I talk about I'm too old and other expensive excuses. Because what I really share is how excuses are often protective narratives. We use them as a shield to avoid the discomfort of taking agency over our lives. But I talked to you about what the cost is of using excuses and how we can reframe so that we can step out of excuses and step into our lives with full agency. So I hope you'll join me in the episode. I think you'll really enjoy it. And when you're finished listening, please like, follow, subscribe, and give me 5 stars. And I look forward to seeing you in the show.
Welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body, recipient of a Gold Markham Award for Excellence in Podcasting Content. Hosted by licensed therapist and wellness expert Angie Miller, this podcast blends psychology and fitness to help you build resilience and feel your best inside and out.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller. And today we are going to talk about excuses. Do you make excuses? Do you have one that's like your best hits excuse? Maybe it's I'm too old, or I'm too busy, or I'm too tired. So today my episode is I'm too old and other expensive excuses, because I'm here to show you that excuses aren't just excuses, they come at a cost. And I know that I've made them. We've all made them. Sometimes we recognize that it is an excuse as it's coming out of our mouth. And other times I think we really believe our own story. Either way, the reality is that excuses keep us stuck. They're this mental barrier that helps us hold steady. They prevent us from getting uncomfortable, from seeking growth and change, and from the possibility, let's face it, that we might fail. So think about it. How many times have you personally said, I'm too old to do that? Or I'm too tired, I'm too busy, it's too late. But here's what I would invite you to consider before we dive into the potential cost of these excuses. And this comes from my work as a therapist as much as my work in fitness and wellness. Excuses are actually protective narratives. We use them as a shield to avoid the discomfort of taking agency over our lives. And agency, in a nutshell, is that belief that we are in control and that we have the capacity to influence our environment. Agency means that we know we're in the driver's seat and we are ready to put our hands on the wheel. But when we make excuses, we pretend we don't have the capacity to drive, to own our decisions, or to take charge of where we're going. We literally kind of take our hands off the wheel. So this episode isn't about shaming you for the stories you tell yourself. We're human and we all fall into the excuse trap. Instead, it's about really getting curious. And I love that word, curious, about what the stories that we tell ourselves are protecting us from. What are the fears and the, kind of old stories that go way back? Because once you recognize those, I think you'll see that you have a choice. You can take agency over your life, and excuses don't have to stand in your way anymore. And maybe they won't come so second nature. So today, my main focus is on the one excuse I hear time and time again. And it's perhaps the most pervasive and socially accepted excuse in our society. And it's pervasive and socially accepted in both how it's used, but also how strongly the stereotype is embraced. And honestly, in my opinion, it's the most heartbreaking because it doesn't just stop us from going to the gym, starting a business, or learning something new. It stops us from believing that we're even worth the effort. And that excuse is age. I'm too old. We say it casually. We say it as a joke. And no, it doesn't just happen like after the age of 50. I mean, I've heard 30-year-olds say I'm too old, meaning like, oh, I'm not 20 anymore. Or teenagers say, I'm too old to do that. Okay, so we say it casually, we say it as a joke, but we say it so often that we stop questioning whether it's even true. And today I want to challenge that story with research and real world examples and some personal truths, because science tells us something very different than what the stories are that we've been telling ourselves. The reality is there is definitely a cost to excuses, and there is especially a cost to the age excuse. Not only are we paying a high price for comfort by staying where we are foregoing growth, and we're turning our back on opportunity, and we're refusing to surpass any perceived limitations. So I hope you'll kind of audit yourself as I'm going through this, and maybe think about the expensive excuses that are costing you the life that you want. So excuse number one, and my number one thing, like I said, is the I'm too old excuse. The moment we lead with age, we limit our potential. We assume that a number on a calendar means more than our ability, more than our desire, and more than our will. And here's something that I think we need to understand before we go any further. There are actually two very different numbers that we're talking about when we talk about age. Chronological age is the number of years you've been alive, and you can't change that. But biological age, kind of known also as physiological or functional age, it takes into account our lifestyle factors like our diet, our exercise, our stress, our sleep habits. So when we say I'm too old, we're pretty much always talking about our chronological age, which means that we're letting a number on a calendar make decisions rather than a number that we actually have the power to influence, because we do have the power to influence our sleep and our stress. And this isn't just a you or a me problem, it's a global problem. So by 2050, the world's population age 60 and over is expected to double to nearly 2 billion. So we're going to go from around 12 to 22% of the world's population. But parallel that or contrast that to 1 in 2 people worldwide still currently hold ageist attitudes and stereotypes toward older adults. So that's half of all people. That means that the very population that's growing fastest is also the one that's the most dismissed. And often what's the most painful is they dismiss themselves. Because ageism isn't just something that happens on the outside. There's something called self-imposed ageism. I'm guilty of this one. And it's when we contribute our physical and mental changes to our age and in turn decline more rapidly. Meaning, I will often do that where I'll use age and it's self-imposed. There's nothing that is showing me that my physical or mental faculties are declining in any way. As a matter of fact, I often feel stronger than I did when I was in my 20s. So by and large, then we become the authors of our own limitations. So the more we buy the stereotypes that society perpetuates, the more we're going to act accordingly. So if we joke about I'm getting old or I'm having senior moments, we use the language, we embrace the narrative, and then it becomes our story. In other words, it becomes a reality. So this self-imposed ageism shows up in subtle ways we don't always recognize. It can be in the language we use. It could be in assumptions that we make, like, oh, I can't do that. I'm too old. But we really don't know. It could be the way we talk to and about older adults, including ourselves. So research supports that ageist stereotypes and beliefs contribute to negative assumptions about cognitive and physical capabilities. So the stereotype lives in the culture, but it also lives within us. We've been told all our lives that when we get older, we're probably going to be forgetful, or when we get older, we're not going to be as strong. And so we start to buy into that and we start dreading age. And then we wonder why are there so many stereotypes? And why is there so much discrimination, surrounding getting older? And yet we think it's funny to use it as an excuse or convenient. We can't have it both ways. People are going to continue to perpetuate the stereotype if we keep talking the narrative. So here's some powerful research about mindset and aging, and I hope it'll make you think twice before you use age as an excuse. There was a Yale researcher, Becca Levy, who found that people with positive perceptions of aging lived on average of 7.5 years longer than those with negative perceptions. So just by thinking differently about getting older, people were found to live 7.5 years longer from perception alone. So mindset really does matter. We believe our own stories. And then a Harvard psychologist, Ellen Langer, her now famous counterclockwise study, where elderly men were placed in an environment and it was designed to reflect their lives 20 years ago. And after just 1 week, they showed measurable improvements in their posture, their grip strength, their memory, and their vision. Their bodies responded to what their minds believed. So that's not just motivational fluff, it's actually science. So there's also something called a stereotype threat. And this is where if you're just reminded of a negative stereotype about your group, it causes you to perform worse, right? It'd be like, the stereotype of like women aren't good drivers. So you get behind the wheel and someone's like, oh, woman driver, and automatically you're more likely to make mistakes. No, that is not a stereotype I embrace. I am an amazing driver, as are most women. So anyway, which means the moment you say I'm too old for this, you've already activated this biological response that works against you. So the research goes further. There's also the stereotype embodiment theory. And think about that word embody. When you embody something, it becomes you. So it's when your perception becomes your reality. And this means that if we internalize a cultural stereotype, it's going to unconsciously influence our self-perception. And it's going to unconsciously influence our functioning and our daily health. So at the end of the day, if we buy into stereotypes about aging, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and there's going to be a cascade of negative repercussions, right? We're going to be less adaptable, less open to learning and change. We might become weaker, more compromised mentally and physically. The story is going to become the biology. Kind of scary, right? So the research is clear. The story you tell yourself about age isn't just a mindset issue. It has measurable biological consequences. Your belief about your age also literally shows up in how you move through the world. There is another body of research that showed that if you have a positive self-perception of aging, you're going to feel younger, and it's going to lead to healthier outcomes like walking speed, increased walking speed, just by having a positive self-perception. In other words, you're not thinking, oh, I'm X age now, I don't walk as fast. You're just thinking, I walk. I've always walked fast. Age is not a barrier. I teach seniors once a week, and the average age is 85. Average age. And they are so remarkably on top of things. They are so remarkably positive and engaged, and they love coming to exercise. They love the socialization. They know the benefits. Never do I hear them use age as an excuse. In fact, age is their motivator. They use age to keep driving, to keep pushing, to keep going further, which is why they moved into this community to be surrounded by like-minded people, and they take advantage of all the activities. They are truly my inspiration. That's what I want to be, right? I want to age into age in a positive way and not even use it as something that I lead with, right? So if we're not careful about attaching age to our limitations, or worse, if we assume that age means we have limitations, we are going to perpetuate the stereotype and act accordingly. That means we're going to stop being curious about learning, about growth, about new opportunities. We're going to be more closed. And then I'm too old is just going to be a really super easy exit ramp. So the truth is, at its core, I'm too old is really just I'm too scared. I don't want to fail. I don't want to look foolish. I don't want people to judge me. But here's some reminders that you might have heard before. Vera Wang designed her first dress at 40. Julia Child published her first cookbook at 49. Colonel Sanders franchised KFC at 62. These aren't exceptions. They're just reminders that the timeline you've assigned to your life is really something you invented. Yes, society perpetuates it, but it's what your mind decides is going to be true. There's also powerful examples in the fitness world. Ida Keeling was a centenarian track and field athlete. She didn't start running till she was 67. Ernestine Shepherd became a competitive bodybuilder, and she didn't start working out till she was 56. Imagine if they believed the stereotypes of the people around them did. And then there's me personally. I always call myself a late bloomer. So I used to produce consumer fitness videos. Most of my competitors started producing videos in their early 20s. I was 42 when I produced my first fitness video. Yes, they are still out there. They're on Amazon. They're everywhere. So I was 42. And I also started teaching at a university. And I had never taught at a university before. And I started teaching courses like stress management, sports psychology when I was 47. And I had no prior university teaching experience. I was a trained educator, but I wasn't trained in university experience. So I was 47 when I started. Then I went back to take graduate courses and a national exam to supplement my master's degree so that I could then become a licensed therapist. And I was just shy of 50. So I personally love calling bluff on age. I love showing society that age is not going to define me. So for me, age has always been a motivator. It's I'm going to show you kind of thing. And I hope that this will inspire you to get a little bit of that in you. And maybe it's not you who does it. Maybe it's your mom or your friend or your grandma or a client that you train. I just would really encourage you, pass this episode along, share it with people, talk about the research. I tell my seniors all the time about this research. So let's move on to the cost. Okay, that was the excuse. What's the cost? What is this age excuse actually costing you and me and society at large? Well, first of all, we opt out before we try. We don't lose because we failed. We lose because we decided we were never going to show up. And then the world never gets what you had to offer. Internalized ageism also. Research supports that it can lower self-efficacy, that self-belief that you have. It can result in decreased motivation and an avoidance of physical activity. Why? Because older adults then hear the stereotype and they're afraid they're going to get injured. And yet physical activity is arguably our most promising, non-pharmacological, non-invasive, and cost-effective method that we can stay healthy. So the cost extends beyond the body too. Ageism also negatively impacts social engagement. And when we're older, we are so much more susceptible to social isolation and loneliness. So when we opt out of social interactions because we think we're too old, maybe we believe we no longer have anything to contribute, maybe we worry that we won't be interesting, or we think that we might be dismissed, but that loss of social engagement is lethal. Because loneliness increases dementia risk by 65%, stroke risk by 30%, and overall mortality by 26%. So here's the dose of reality. There are studies that demonstrate that people who have little confidence in their abilities or believe that they have little control over the outcome will put forth less effort. They'll be more anxious and they'll engage in less health behaviors, health promoting behaviors like exercise, in part because they simply assume that their efforts aren't going to make a difference. Like they go, oh, it's too late, or why start now, or I might get injured. And that's the age excuse at its most expensive, because you're not just missing a workout, you're missing the belief that anything you do will matter. And to me, that's the highest cost of ageism and the highest cost of using age as an excuse. It's this determination that it's not going to matter anymore. Like, oh, you've hit a certain age, so what's the point? Oh, that's just like, that hits me right here in the heart, right? Because it's always going to matter. Every day that you're here, it matters that you're showing up as your best self. It matters that you're giving it your all, not because of age, but in spite of age, at all ages. So what's the reframe? How do we stop using age as an excuse and prevent the high cost that comes with it? So when you think about aging, I'm curious, do you think about declines and losses or gains and growth? Both exist. Let's be real. Research does tell us that aging does come with some declines and losses, sure. But it also brings tremendous gains and growth. There's an increase in freedom and in patience. There's an increase in dignity and self-respect. There's a greater sense of maturity and wisdom. And there's more liberties because there's generally more monetary resources and, of course, time. So both of those are real, right? Either declines and losses or gains and growth, but whatever one you feed is the one that's going to lead. So are we going to focus on positive examples that inspire healthy behavior or negative examples that make us want to feel fear and avoid, just focus on avoidance? So age is literally a number on a calendar. It's only relevant if we make it so. Age comes with wisdom. It comes with lived experience. That's why I love my seniors so much. I love hearing their stories. Mistakes we've already made and learned from, and life stages we've already passed through that have taught us so much about ourselves and the world around us. Age is a gift. It's our stories and our lessons, and it's a gift that's meant to be shared. Age doesn't just tell you where you've been. It doesn't, or age tells you where you've been, but it says nothing about where you're going, right? There are no limitations. You're not old, but you might be too comfortable. So here's the thing about comfort. It doesn't grow. It doesn't reach. It doesn't surprise you. You're not curious anymore. You're just stuck. So the next time age shows up as your excuse, get curious. Ask yourself, what is this excuse protecting me from? Because I bet it's not protecting you from failure. It could be protecting you from the possibility that you might actually succeed. And then you have to keep going. Like sometimes there's that pressure of, yes, I might fail, but the flip side of that is I might succeed. And then I call my own bluff and then I have to keep going and I recognize, oh, I am totally capable of this. And then the excuse no longer plays a role and you have to get into life, right? Get your boots on and get strong. So before I sign off on this, age is, I think, probably the number one excuse, but there's also a couple more that I think we use a lot. And I think they're expensive excuses also. And they don't operate alone. Okay. Age usually brings along some of its friends. And one of them is I'm too busy. Busy, I feel like, is the most like socially acceptable excuse we have. Nobody questions it. Nobody pushes back. And it's almost like busyness is a badge of honor. So the thing is, you could be busy. You could be constantly in motion, but not really moving forward. Maybe because you're busy, you're not really busy doing things that matter. But really what busy is it's a values problem disguised as a time problem. It just means that maybe we don't have our values in alignment. Like we're not leading with our values. We're making it about time when really values are about priorities. So like think about it. The person who says they don't have time to exercise somehow finds time to do other things. The person who says that they're too busy to invest in their mental health somehow finds, opportunities to possibly numb the dark feelings. So the reframe here is you're not too busy. It's just a matter of reprioritizing, leading with your values. Because when something truly matters, we all know it's non-negotiable. You will find the time. And then last but not least, I hear this one. I don't know if you hear this one. That's just how I am. That one's sneaky because it sounds like self-awareness. Like someone says, well, that's how I am. And you're going, oh, well, maybe they've got some personal insight. But really, it's self-protection kind of dressed up as self-awareness. When you say that's just how I am, you're handing your growth over to who you were yesterday, the day before, 2 years before. You let the person you were at 20 or 30 or in the middle of your hardest season make decisions for the person you are today. But here's the clinical truth behind this. What that's really called is a fixed mindset. The belief that your character, your intelligence, your abilities are carved in stone. You are done. You are the finished product. But the research on neuroplasticity tells us a completely different story. The brain will retain its capacity for change. You'll be able to learn, rewire across your lifespan. You're not fixed. You're not done. So the reframe is who you've been is not a life sentence. Progress requires you to stop defending your default excuses and to get curious about who you are still capable of becoming. So my takeaway for you is every time you make one of those excuses or you hold yourself back, you risk staying stuck. And the gifts you have to offer are going to stay locked up into a story that was never really true. Your mind wants to keep you safe, but growth means you got to get out of your comfort zone. So of these excuses that I named today, is there one that's more expensive for you? Is there a small step you can take today so that you can stop paying for that excuse or stop using that excuse? Whatever it is, maybe it's the age one. Maybe you lean on I'm too busy. Maybe that's just how I am. Or maybe it's a different excuse, but just keep in mind, it's keeping you stuck. So thank you for joining me today on Strong Mind, Strong Body. Your time is my gift. And I appreciate you sharing your feedback, your insights, your questions. You can email me at Angie@angiemillerwellness.com, or you can share your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for spending time with Strong Mind, Strong Body. Angie will be back with more tools to help you feel strong and centered. Like, share, and subscribe.